You're listening to Attack Friday, actionable tips, tricks, and coachable knowledge. Attack Friday is brought to you by the Change Your POV Podcast Network. And now, let's get ready to attack. Hello, ladies and gents. This is Eddie Lazary. As one of the co-founders of the Change Your POV Podcast Network, it's up to me to help guide and direct the other hosts of the network. I freely offer my unsolicited feedback about what I like, dislike, and I'm always good for offering each of the hosts things that they could do better. There are a lot of little things about podcasting and being a podcaster that can always be done just a little bit better. And in this episode of Attack Friday, you will have the rare opportunity to listen to me without my microphone turned on. That's right. My side of the conversation was recorded with my built-in laptop microphone. Bennett, on the other hand, still sounds sexy as always. Hope you enjoy. Hello, folks. Welcome to Change Your POV. This is Attack Friday. Attack is an acronym, actionable tips, tricks, and coachable knowledge. And I am your host, Eddie Lazary.
And I am Bennett Tanton.
And today we're talking about the words we use. Oftentimes, we don't pay much attention to the words we use. And in fact, a lot of people brag about how many words within their language exists and how broad their vocabulary is, which are all great things. But language is also about the psychology. And as I've always said on this show, and I'll say it again, communication is done by the listener, right? The person that's speaking is just uttering words. The real communication happens at the person's ear that's listening to you. Do they understand what you're trying to convey? Do they feel the emotions that you're trying to communicate from one brain to another, right? And so that's why oftentimes you hear the words lost in translation. I mean, we've all been part of that game where we all sit around in a circle and somebody comes up with a phrase and they whisper it right around the circle. And by the time it gets to the end, the phrase is completely different. Why? Because people recall things differently. They relay information differently, and they communicate the intent differently. We've also probably all tried that exercise. I don't know if you've done this before, Bennett, but we've done this in some in corporate team building events. That it's that one phrase. It's the phrase is like, "I didn't say you have an attitude problem," right? And that's the one phrase. But if you say each of the words with a different emphasis, then it means something different. Like, "I didn't say you had an attitude problem." Like, what does that mean? That means that, like, I didn't say, but maybe somebody else did, right? Or I didn't say you had an attitude problem, right? So you emphasize each of those words, and it has a totally different meaning, even though the phrase is the same, right? So the words we use and how we use them, that's what we're going to talk about today. And I've come up with some examples here. And again, this is not an all-inclusive list. This is just a way for you to start thinking about the different ways that you communicate and the different ways you say certain things and the way you hear things. Oftentimes, and I've said this on the show before, is when I first got out of the military, everything was very black and white to me. It shouldn't have been, but it was. I thought there was right and wrong and good and evil and good and bad and all these things, and communication was very black and dry, and I was completely unaware of all the politics involved and innuendos and all these behind the scenes things, right, that make up our real world. It took me a while to enter the real world, as it were.
Right.
And one of the things that I had to learn the hard way is oftentimes, even though what I was communicating was correct and accurate to the point, it was delivered in such a way where it wasn't received very well. And I had to get into more of the psychology of communication. And here's a couple of examples. So and we use it all the time and we don't really think about it. The word is but, right? And right now for this first instance, I want to talk about what does but mean? How do we use it? And what can it mean to the other person? So if I'm going to, like, if Bennett does a really good job on something, let's say he released last week's episode and I wanted to provide him with constructive criticism. And I would start off the comment by saying, Bennett, last week you did a really good job doing all of the recording, scheduling the interview with the guest, doing the recording, doing all the post-production and editing. But there were some things about that episode that needed a little work from the back-end standpoint when we uploaded it into the website. Right?
Yeah.
So everything. Now, what do you hear when I use that phrase and I have that switch word "but" in there? What is it? What is everything that comes before that? Well, how do you interpret that?
Well, it gets negated. Everything before the "but" is negated.
Right. It's almost as if I didn't even really mean it, or I wasn't.
Yeah, you're just saying it. It's like it's just filler, and then but you suck balls.
So everything. So in your mind, you're thinking that the only real point I'm trying to make is the information that comes after the but. Anything that comes before that is kind of
because it's usually and you know what, and we're all so used to this. Usually the but is sucky information.
Right.
So everyone waits for it. It's like the other shoe, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But because you'll see it, people will say something and then they'll pause because they know that they're doing it wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like especially young leaders, you see this a lot with them. So they'll say something, they'll pause or they'll stop, and the person that they're talking to will go, but.
Right.
Because
yeah.
So it's so ingrained.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And it's also a way, whether we've been taught, I don't think anybody's really been taught, like, actually, I don't think anybody sits in a class and learns this, but it's taught through the practice of others. We learn through behavior. We learn through others' behavior, our parents, our teachers, our coworkers, our bosses. So we learn through behavior, and we learn how other people do it. And this is kind of like we learn how to deliver negative feedback by trying to preface it with some good filler stuff. Right. And then we get into the stuff that we really want to talk about. Well, and this happens a lot in business, especially within management, right? I can't tell you how many times I've received a piece of feedback from my manager that went something very similar to that. I liked how you did this and this and this, but this is something that you can maybe do to do better next time. Now, nobody's malicious when they do this.
No, well, not usually.
Not usually, right?
Because they are trying to give constructive feedback.
Exactly. But what we do is, see, I just did it right. But what we do is
psychologically.
So how do we change the wording that we use so the information that we provide prior to the but has equal value as the information that precedes the but? Well, it's a very simple, very easy to implement, but a lot of people don't do it. And even if you know how to do it, it takes a lot of practice. If you substitute the word but for and, that's all you got to do. Instead of saying the word but, you say and. So it sounds like this. Bennett, last week, I just wanted to tell you that you did a great job scheduling the interview with the guest. You did all of the recording, and you did the post-production and loading into the website. And there's a few things I'd like to share with you that will make the next time you do that even better. And here's what they are. Right? Does that have a different feel to it?
Yeah, of course.
Right. But that's all I did. I simply switched the word but to and. Right? So how does it sound in a work environment? Let's say you're a manager and you've got a direct and you want to provide them with some feedback. Think about some things, obviously, that they've done in it that's positive. Think about some things that you want them to change. And again, it's about behavior, right? You start talking about somebody's attitude. Like, here's a good example. Let's say you're my direct, Bennett. Bennett, thanks for showing up on time to that meeting today. I really do appreciate it. And I like how you kind of interjected your points there and really helped carry that conversation along. And right, so now I'm getting into some other pieces of information. And if you allow the other people within the meeting an opportunity to complete their sentences, maybe everybody in the meeting will have a better holistic view of what the topic and conversation is about. Right? So we're talking about what you've done good. We've talked about some things that you could do better. But here's a piece of criticism that attacks somebody's thought process or belief or attitude, right? So it says something like this: Bennett, I think you did a really good job in the meeting today. And there's some things that you could do better with regard to your attitude. You just kind of had a little bit of a negative attitude while you were sitting in the meeting today. Now, when you start talking about somebody's attitude, you instantly, that person instantly moves into the defensive mode. Why?
Oh, because you're accusing them of.
It's because that I know there's no way I can prove attitude, right?
Yeah.
If I tell you, Bennett, you got a bad attitude, you instantly can defend that because there's no way. That there's no way I can. All you have to say is, no, I don't, right? And I'm like, yes, you do. No, I don't. Well, yes, you did. Well, no, I didn't. Right? And so it goes into this back and forth, and nothing really, really happens, right? But if I instead of addressing your attitude, if I address a behavior, for example, it sounds something like this: Bennett, thanks for showing up for the meeting on time today. I really do appreciate timeliness. It helps us get the meeting off to a great start. And there's a few things that I think that you could do next time to help encourage conversation. I noticed that when you sat in your chair and your arms were crossed and you didn't make eye contact with people around the room, it gives the impression to some that you're not really paying attention. You don't really care about what's being talked about. Could you do that differently next time, right? So I didn't talk about your attitude. I talked about behavior. It's hard to argue behavior, isn't it?
Yep. So one of the points I want to make here is, all right, so I can already hear some of our audience going, Jesus, this is this touchy-feely,
right? Yeah,
bullshit, whatever. But folks, we are, we're not all veterans,
right?
But see, we're not all veterans. This is a different instance, though.
Yeah,
we're all veterans, but not all of us. And this type of communication works very effectively. It almost blindsides you when a leader uses it effectively, because we're talking about leaders using this type, or you as a manager or someone in charge of something. You will get a totally different reaction, okay, from somebody if you literally just change but to and rephrase it. It really is an amazing use of it. Believe it or not, try it and see what happens. That it really does change it. People almost get blindsided and they're like, oh man, it's like they're waiting for that but if you hit them with the and,
right.
I don't know. It's psychological. It really is.
It is very, it's a disruptor. It's an interrupter. Like, you and I watched that, was it on Netflix with Tony Robbins, where he's kind of a behind the scenes one of his conferences, right?
Yep.
And, he'd use phraseology in words that would completely disrupt the thought process or the mind pattern of someone that's listening. Because oftentimes listening can be a very passive activity. We're in a conversation, whether it be in a meeting with our boss, with a coworker, or even, in the car with our wives or our children. Sometimes listening can just turn into this very passive, non-active, you just flip a switch, right? You turn it on, and it's almost like, when you travel in a car to the same destination every single day, like when I go to work, I take the same route every day. Sometimes I could get in the car, 40 minutes later, I'm pulling into the parking lot at work, and I'm like, holy shit, how did I even get here, right? You don't even think about it because it becomes so routine. Well, communication oftentimes can become as routine and as monotonous as just driving to the same place every day. So you just turn on the listening bug or the listening switch in your mind, and you're really not absorbing what's being said.
Yep.
So if somebody uses these disruptor words when they're communicating to you, or if you use disruptor words when you're trying to communicate to someone else that might be in that holding pattern, then it's going to trigger them to engage with that conversation more because because it's different than anything they hear all the time, right?
Yes.
And it's as easy as switching but to and. Seriously, try it.
Yeah, and if nothing else, it really does. It just adds. I mean, you can also use different things too. Additionally, is a word that I had a that I've used and I have had bosses use. Well, I learned it from one of my old bosses.
Yeah,
he would just extend a point, but he would change the point with using additionally.
Yeah, and another word that's similar to but is however, right?
However, well, but those words, they still have the same effect. They're not really any better.
Correct. So but equals however and equals additionally, right? So
Right. Additionally, again, there's a whole bunch. I mean,
yeah.
dude, pull up a thesaurus and
Right.
check it out.
Right.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Because I had a professor that used to use furthermore.
Oh, there you go.
Like very fancy, you know. I mean, but it's not. But it just sounds. I don't know.
It's got to match your personality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I couldn't pull furthermore off.
No.
I mean, I could like in an email, but like in normal conversation, if I'd be like, and furthermore, Bennett, you'd be like, what?
And furthermore, right.
Like, who do you think you are?
Because that brings up a good point, and I think we need to touch on this before the end of the episode, is communication with words, right?
Yeah.
Because so often now, the majority of our communication, especially with colleagues or Jesus, you can hear that dog.
Oh yeah.
Hold on. I had to take her collar off, otherwise it jangles. All right. So communication with colleagues and people that work for you is mainly done through email.
Right.
So these things still matter then, because you do have a tone when you write.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring up that point as well.
And you almost have to be more careful when you're writing an email.
You really do. At least you have time usually to kind of like work that out.
Because in email, you miss the opportunity to because when you're communicating vocally, you've got inflection in your voice, you've got tonality, you've got tempo. There's a lot of, or even in face-to-face, you've got, little cues, facial expressions, things that you're kind of emanating to the listener, and back and forth, right? So in-person communication is by far the best. Phone communication is next. I would have to say in-person is number one.
Yeah, but because body language is like 70% of communication, and one-on-one.
Absolutely. So in-person is preferred. Next best would be like a Skype or Zoom call where you can see the person while you're communicating. And then next would be on the phone, and then finally through email. So it's amazing how email is actually the least of all those that I listed, is the least preferred. However, it's the number one method by which we communicate today.
But it's also the easiest.
It is
because it doesn't contain all the other emotional,
right?
Or it's technically anonymous, I guess is the right word to use.
Yeah.
Even when somebody knows you're the one doing it, you can say whatever you want without immediate repercussion.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
So that's why trolls use it, and because you can click it off and ignore it.
Yeah.
But it's just as powerful. I mean, how many times do you see, and how many times do you also get misconceptions because of a way an email is written?
Well, and that's the other thing too, is how in your professional career, Bennett, how many times have you received feedback from any of your managers regarding your communications via email?
None.
right? It rarely happens, right? So even
Rarely.
though it's the number one way by which we communicate in today's corporate world, everyone does it, everyone reads it. Not everybody does it well, but hardly anyone ever receives feedback around how to communicate via email. So if you're a manager or supervisor and you've got people that work for you that are routinely communicating via email, providing some pieces of feedback around your direct ability to communicate through that medium is incredibly important. Now, back to what you said a little earlier, about veterans listening to this and kind of doing a giant eyeball roll, right? If I were to listen, if we
I
had
could hear that eyeball roll.
if we recorded this today, and I took a time machine, I went back in time and I found my earlier self just getting out of the military, and I had my earlier self listen to this episode. My earlier self would give such a great big eyeball roll; it would be unbelievable, like literally.
Your eyes would get stuck in the back of your head.
Yeah,
Like that's what I always say to my kids. If you rolled your eyes any harder, they'll get stuck in the back of your head. Right?
Yeah, because my experience in the military for 10 years, the communication was very direct. It was, I say X, you do Y, and if you don't like it, tough shit. You know what I
And
mean?
that's
Like,
life.
I
That's
mean,
the way it is. But you
right.
suck, you suck, you suck.
Yes.
But, right?
Exactly. And I did provide feedback to my guys, but it was one-way communication oftentimes. It was very rarely two-way communication. And there was
Probably 90% of the time.
right. And it was very little me thinking about what I'm about to say in terms of how would it impact the listener, right? I didn't consider that at all. I didn't give a shit how it impacted the listener, right? I have something to say. I've got a piece of criticism. We did something. We fucked up somehow. This is how we're going to change it. Drive on, move out, drive on. Do great things, right?
Because we don't have time to be
right.
pussyfoot around it. And
Right.
those exact verbiage that you hear used all the time. But
And
when you're not in that situation,
yeah,
I'm so sorry. It's just the way it's folks. What we're trying to do here, and this is what attack episodes are about, is because Eddie and I have both been in the corporate world now for both shit. Me, it's been 15 years.
Yeah, me too.
So, and I'm going to use my perfect phrase as I always do. At the end of the day, that's your freaking reality.
Yeah.
Right. Our reality is this now. And we're trying to give you this information to learn.
Yeah.
That you will succeed faster if you play by the rules.
Mm-hmm.
There are rules. You can't change them unless you start your own thing. But still, even then, you still have to deal with other people.
Right.
And this isn't touchy-feely. It's not political correctness. It's just effective communication.
Correct.
That's what this is. I mean, I've got to find that book so we can put it in the show notes and talk about it a little bit. But the effective communication is a big deal.
Yeah.
You'll get so much done versus just being a dick.
Well, there you go. That you just hit the nail on the head. Effective communication is about productivity. It's about execution. It's about results, right? It really is. It comes down to your ability as whether it's an individual contributor and you're working with coworkers, or you're a supervisor and you got a couple of directs, or you're a manager and you got a department, or you're a director and you're a manager of managers, or you're an executive, a vice president, president, CEO, whatever level that you are. Maybe you're an entrepreneur and you own your own business. You're going to have people that work for you. You're going to be dealing with customers on a daily basis. So communication at the end of the day is about effectiveness, and it's about results. If your ability, or I should say your inability to communicate effectively, is hampering your ability to yield results, then that's your problem and you need to fix it. Right? That's not anyone else listening that's misinterpreting what you're saying. You're not delivering it in an effective way.
And at the end of the day, again, it's your problem.
Your problem.
Correct. Your problem.
Yep.
Nobody else's, because as Eddie said at the beginning, communication is done by the listener. And if you're not effectively communicating your point, the way that that person is communicating with you, then you're not communicating with them.
Right.
And you as an effective leader need to learn how to do such with your individual folks.
Absolutely. If you, Bennett, if you misinterpret what I say, that's my fault, not yours. Right. And it's hard because a lot of people don't want to own that responsibility, the ownership of that communication, but you have to. It's about accountability. It's about, in the military, we always talk about accountability, and, drive accountability. And we love accountability. And we get out, and all of a sudden, we want to place the blame on anything and everything and everyone else. It's the VA's fault for this, and it's that person, they didn't understand what I said. You know what I mean? Like, you need to own it. Communication, you own that communication. And if you are communicating ineffectively, you need to change the way you communicate. Here's the next example. Oftentimes, we are in a position with family members, with coworkers, bosses, in a meeting, working with whatever, where somebody's going to say something that you're going to disagree with. And you got a couple options. You could either just sit there and just, in your mind, be like, that's bullshit, I disagree, and you just don't voice your opinion. Or you can open your mouth and come at them a little bit and disagree. Now, there's many ways that this can be done, and I've seen it done very poorly, and I've seen it done successfully. So this next one is change. Again, it's about the words we use, right? So if I'm in a meeting, and let's say I'm in a meeting with you, Bennett, and you say something that I just think is completely off the deep end, like you don't know what you're talking about, right? I disagree, right? I could easily use that word. No, Bennett, I'm sorry. I have to disagree with you there, right? A lot of people will use that phraseology as a way to kind of counterpunch or counteract somebody's.
Is that even a word?
What?
Phraseology.
It is. Absolutely. Look it up.
Okay. Just wondering.
So I could say, no, Bennett, I disagree. I'd like to counteract with this instead, right? Now, well, what's the problem in your mind with using the word I disagree or the phrase I disagree?
Well, immediately it's shit. I can't even think of my words.
Does it
it's
feel like
adversarial?
Does it feel like an attack on you personally?
Yes, and that's how everyone's going to take it. It's
absolutely
very adversarial, and yes.
So, and that's exactly how everybody takes it. As soon as you open your mouth and you say something, somebody responds with "I disagree." You immediately, and it's natural. I mean, nobody's bad. Nobody's a bad person for doing it. Everyone does it. You feel attacked because somebody is attacking your belief or your stance or your position, right? And so it's very difficult to come to a place of change, right? And we always talk about the left and the right. Real change really happens in the middle. And oftentimes you see that, especially in today's political environment with the Republicans and Democrats, it's very much I disagree, no, I disagree, no, I disagree. And the more they disagree with each other, the further apart they become. And we all know that real change happens in the aisle, right, in the middle. And so if I were to change up that verbiage a little bit, if you were to say something in a meeting that I disagree with, I could say, Bennett, can I challenge that idea? Now I'm asking permission. That sounds different, right? I'm asking you permission. And I'm making it so I'm not challenging you personally. I'm just challenging what's on the table now, right? So
and never have I had anyone have an issue with that.
Right.
I mean, they might, but you see there's a difference.
Very big difference.
Feel it. Like you can feel it in the way that people react to that. You literally will see them roll their shoulders back, like put their chest out and like sit back and usually invite you then to challenge their idea.
Right.
Because most people are they think that they're the right one. They think that they're right.
Yeah.
So they're very confident in their stance.
Right. And what happens with that phrase, can I challenge that idea? There's a little tiny psychological switch in their mind that happens. As soon as I ask permission, if I'm actually serious about this, And here's the thing: never ask a question unless you're able to accept the answer. So if I were to ask the question, Bennett, can I challenge that idea? And if you were to say no, then I wouldn't force myself in anyway. I would just say, okay, that's fine. And then we just move on. But if I ask the question, can I challenge that idea? And I pose it in a question, and I ask you permission, that little psychological switch in your mind, as soon as you say yes, please go ahead, what you've done now is you've given the floor an opportunity to breathe, right? It's no longer about you, and it's not about me. It's about the idea on the table, right? So it's no longer a personal attack. It's not an attack against you. It's not an attack against anyone else in the room. It's not even an attack at all. It's really nothing more than a challenging or an opposing idea. That's all it is. It's amazing what happens when you approach a disagreement using different words.
And I have had people say no.
Right. Me too.
Especially leaders, leaders, because here's what it comes down to. Sometimes your opinion doesn't fucking matter.
That's true.
Sometimes it doesn't. And it really, you have to be okay with that.
Right. And the other thing, can I challenge that idea? What it forces you to do is offer an alternative. Now, there's nothing worse than being in a communication or a group meeting or whatever, and somebody just says, oh, that's bullshit. I disagree with that. Okay.
And then you're like, why?
Right.
And if I have to ask you why, I mean, the only time now that I would ever be, because I still do use from time to time. I did it this Friday in a meeting at work, and I was like, I disagree, and here's why.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't give them the chance to say no because I felt that it was very important, but I don't do that often. It's one of those things that it's one of those prefaces. You've better be like, I disagree, and here's why.
Correct.
But it's using the same thing. So it's like, I disagree, but it wouldn't be as effective. I disagree, and here's why, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
And most of the time that diffuses the situation too. It's not as effective as asking permission.
Right.
But you have to figure out when to use it.
Correct. Yep. And the word challenge it's a half, I mean, disagree is a very black and white term, right?
Very.
And that's the thing, what we're talking about here is
nothing's
right. Nothing in this world is black and white, but when we use terminology that's black and white, it's very difficult to communicate because nothing in this world is black and white, right? So yes, no, disagree, agree. Those are all very black and white, right? We start using words like challenge, right? It's kind of an in-between. But is very black and white, and is very inviting, right? So think about the words that you use. And here's the tip. Here's part of the Attack Friday thing. Find somebody, a coworker, perhaps that you work with. Now, it works better if it's a peer, not a manager. If it's a peer of yours, it works best because a peer of yours is going to look at it from a non-investment perspective. If you were to ask your manager to do this, it would be very much more of a performance thing. So find a peer that you trust and ask them, hey, whenever I'm in a meeting, if you could, and give them a list of words that you want to work on. Don't just say, hey, could you keep an eye on the terms and words that I use in my meeting and then provide me with some feedback afterwards. They're not going to know what the hell they even look for, right? So if there's certain words that you struggle with, like here's a good example. We're all podcasters, so we all have an opportunity to listen to each other's shows, and we often give each other a lot of feedback. And so I'll let Andrew know that he uses like excessively, right? I just said it. There was a word that I say on a very frequent basis. I think what did you say it was, Bennett? The other day you told me.
You know.
I say often.
I do it too. And I will say, I'm better, but it used to be, God, it was so bad.
Right. We get better as we go. If you're listening to some of our early shows, you'll hear, And I also start a lot of my sentences on this podcast with so. And I recognize that because somebody pointed it out to me,
Yeah.
and now it's in my conscience, and I can work on it. So get you like that?
At the end of the day.
Jesus.
At the end of the day, I use that all the time. So that's what I'm actually working on right now. Because if you ever notice, folks, if you look and think about this episode, I'll acknowledge every time I say it, and that's half the battle. You've got to kind of know when you're saying it.
Right. So get a list of words, or if you don't know what you use often, that's probably the best place to start, is ask your peer coworker, when we're in meetings together, could you just write down some words or phrases that I use a lot that are not.
Tell me how I'm so annoying, please.
Right. And again, the key thing here is, please let me know words or phrases that I use on a frequent basis while talking in a meeting that does not add value to the conversation. That's the key there. It's words or phrases that's used in communication that do not add value to the communication. Words like and so, and and you can really use a lot of words to excess. And let them know, hey, I want you to pay specific attention to words like but and I disagree and other black and white words that don't help move the conversation forward. And you'll be amazed if you have somebody that's a peer that is honest with you and is very candid with this process. You'll be amazed at your ability to alter and change the way you communicate. Another way of doing this, and it depends, because there's a lot of, when we talk about corporate, right? It's not, everyone has a laptop, everyone has their phone in a meeting. If you were to just hit record and record that meeting, there may be some ramifications for that from a professional standpoint. So you may be in a sensitive meeting that shouldn't be recorded, things like that. So you got to be cognizant of just blindly recording a meeting. You kind of got to get consensus at the beginning of the meeting. You could say, hey, I would really like to record this conversation on my phone for reference later. Does anyone mind? And if you could get consensus around the table, it shouldn't be an issue. But if one person, even if it's a meeting of 30 people and just one person doesn't like it, then you can't do it, right? That's just being courteous. Yep. So that's the easiest way to do it, is record your conversation or record your meetings. That's what's nice about podcasts, is they're all recorded. You can go back and listen to them. But otherwise, the only way to do that is you got to get somebody outside of your head to do that for you, and that is in a trusted peer. Now, the next one, we're wrapping up here. We got a few minutes left, but the next, some of the words that we use oftentimes put us in a different state of mind. Now, Bennett, you and I, we've done a lot about trying to understand our environment a little bit better, right? And we understand our self-actualization and how different things can put us in different moods based off of the words, the word choices that we use, right? And again, I'm not going to get into all the real woo-woo stuff here, and I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist or word expert or anything like that. But I do know that the words we use oftentimes put us in a different mindset. And I think the what's it when you go to those oh my God, what is it? Those phrases that we chant. What are they called? Mantras?
Oh, no. Well, you have mantras, but they're affirmations.
Affirmations, right. So, when it comes to like meditation, there's mantras and affirmations. There's like phrases or words that you'll say over and over and over to get you into the right state of mind. And again, this is something that earlier on in my life I would have just completely rolled my eyes at. But
you're like, Jesus, really?
Right. But I've since tried some of the stuff, and it's I'm telling you, man, by saying things to yourself, it's almost like self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways, right? And it works both ways, right? If you say, I'm never going to do that, I'm never going to do that, I'm never going to do that, like you're setting yourself up mentally to never be able to do that. But if you say, I'm going to do that, and so that the word that I like to use for this is yet, right? Anytime I say something, I always follow it up with the word yet, whether in vocally or in my mind. Here are some examples. I'm not an author. Somebody was talking about, I think it was Dwayne, talking about publishing his book. He's actually working on publishing his second book. And I was talking with him one day, and I was like, man, I've really thought about writing my own book. I want to do that someday. I am not an author, right? And I left that sentence alone, and then I thought about it for a minute, and I'm like, wait a minute, you're right. I'm not an author yet, right? So that yet, by putting yet at the end of that statement, it leaves the door open, right? I'm not an author yet. I don't have my degree yet. I'm not a good speaker yet. I don't write very well yet, right? So by putting that simple word yet at the end of those statements of things that you're working on or like to do better, you're leaving the door open for growth and opportunity. I know it sounds very silly, but
it does.
It's incredibly powerful.
But the way that you talk to yourself affects how you feel and how you behave.
Absolutely.
It truly does. It's very, again, I'm rolling my eyes now just thinking about it. My eyes actually are rolling because it takes a lot of people, especially people that are older like us that are in our age. We remember like the Stuart Smalley skits off of, I think that was off of SNL.
Yeah.
Do you remember that stuff?
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what he said, but it's really funny. I'm good enough and whatever, but it works, especially when if you say it out loud.
Right. Yeah.
And you say your own name.
Right.
I'm telling you, it's effective. It just is. It just is.
Another thing that I do, we talked earlier about pattern interrupts, right? Things that we say that would cause a disruption in the normal pattern. How many times you go to work, Bennett, and you just run into somebody in the break room, or you run into somebody, on the way into the bathroom or whatever, and it without even thinking about it, it's like, how you doing? Good. How are you? Right? Isn't that pretty standard?
Yes, very.
Okay. Somebody, you're like, hey, how you doing? Good. How are you? Right? And it's just so like meaningless. It's just something that you do to break.
There's people that don't even acknowledge. They're like,
right,
because it's so just like.
So one of the things,
or they'll say whatever they're. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. What I do is for purposes of pattern interrupt, when somebody says, "How are you doing?" I know they're just asking because it's just a trigger. They don't really. Most times they don't really care, right?
Mindless.
It's a mindless question. It's just a common thing. And what I say in response is, I say, "I'm doing awesome. How are you?" And that response is so unlike the response that they get other times that it catches them completely off guard, right? So go ahead and ask me how I'm doing, Bennett.
How are you doing, Eddie?
I'm doing awesome. How are you? Right?
Peachy.
I guarantee you, go to work on Monday, and the first person that asks you how you're doing, just say, "I'm doing awesome."
And when you say that to me on the phone, when I ask you, I say bullshit. That's what I always say. Am I right? Bullshit.
Yeah. But it's such a natural thing for me now that I use that every time. And it's amazing what happens after, because people will be like, you can see how it completely stops them in their tracks. And they switch from this, almost like this robot-esque kind of, standard move going through the motions. And it kind of snaps them out of it. It's almost like a trance, right?
And they're
like, what? It's wow. You're doing that well, and it's a Monday. You're like, absolutely, I am.
How do I get some of that?
Right. And so it completely. Trust me, try it. It's funny. It's actually comical sometimes. The responses that you get. Some people get so flubbergasted they don't even know how to respond to that. They just kind of like, they look at you funny, and they kind of shake their head, they smile, and then they kind of go about their business. But it's funny, the words that we use, right?
As you know, people are creatures of habit.
They are.
You are as well.
Yeah.
Everybody is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So find a way to knock people out of that.
Yep.
And you will. It does a couple of things, and that's probably for a different episode. But as a communicator, seriously, make people think outside the box, just even in those little ways. And this is like Dale Carnegie stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Dale's books, oh my God, why can't I? How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Correct. Yep.
These are things like that. And if you've never read that book, do so immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed.
And he's got a couple of different books that are pretty awesome.
Now that's a book that I have a hard copy of, and I was trying to read it.
Yep.
Couldn't do it.
Oh, it's hard. It's
difficult.
It's a difficult read because it was written like in the 30s or something.
Yeah. I got it on audio and I was able to get through it, but I tried to read it and I was like, couldn't do it, man. Yeah.
You got to take it in snippets.
Yeah. Very dense book.
Right.
But it's excellent. It's good stuff.
It is. It's kind of like Think and Grow Rich. It's not an easy book to read.
Right. And I think that's what we're talking about, right? The whole Think and Grow Rich, it's about a mindset. Yeah. It's about changing your mindset, your verbiage, your language around what you're trying to accomplish. And if in a communication with someone, the goal is to communicate effectively, not how do I say this? When you're in communication with somebody, whether it be verbal, written, or otherwise, your number one goal should be to communicate effectively, whatever that may mean, not pass an agenda.
Effectively, right? And efficiently.
Efficiently, yes. Bottom line up front, I can't tell you how many times I get an email that's like 6 paragraphs long, and I'm busy. I get a lot of emails, and I'm like, okay, I'm reading. I'm like, Jesus, like, what do they want, right? Like, what's the bottom line here? And then all the way down to the bottom, and somebody will say, all right, I say all of that to say this. This is what I'm like, Jesus. Like, put that in the front. Like, you know what I mean? Like, lead with that.
It's one of those things where you're like doing the hand motion where you're like, come on. And then you just want to be like, you want to scream out less words.
Yes. It's like bottom line up bottom line up front, put what you're asking up front, and then say, here's what I want. And here's the follow-up or the background behind that. And then follow that. That way, if I don't have time to read the remaining 9 paragraphs, I got time to read the first paragraph and I at least understand what you want, and we can move forward, right? But oh my God, I can't tell you how frustrating that is.
Like, I'm not sitting down to read a blog post.
Yes, exactly right. So, well, that's a great show, man. Like I said, we've got many, many other examples that we could probably have talked about. The biggest ones, though, it's really about.
We want to give your eyes a rest.
Yeah, right. You're sitting here in your car, like about to crash into everything with all these eyeball rolls you're giving us.
Right.
But you know what? At the end of the day, this stuff it works. It's real. I've tested it. I never always used to believe in it. I was always a skeptic
or even cared.
Right. Absolutely. But this is like real shit, and it does work, and it's changed the way I've been able to communicate, not just on, with you guys within the network, but with my coworkers, with my bosses, with my family. It's not far too often we try to separate who we are based off of our environment. And I'm a work self. I got my work self. I got my home self. I got my, and I understand you may act a little bit different in each of those environments, but at the end of the day, you need to bring your whole self everywhere you go, right? And be cognizant of your environment that you're in, right? Because there's things that I may say on this podcast in terms of language that I use that I'm not going to use in a meeting at work, right? Because I'm smart enough to understand my environment and where I am and who my audience is. When I'm on the show, I'm talking to you, my audience. When I'm at work, I'm talking to those in the meeting, my audience, different audience. So I've got to curtail my language and my word choices accordingly. People that don't have that filter and don't understand the audience that they're speaking with they're gonna struggle in their life.
Yeah, they will.
I mean, it was very similar when I was in the military. I'd talk to my guys a certain way all day, every day, and then I come home and I try to talk to my wife and kids that way. It didn't fly, man.
No,
it just didn't fly. It
doesn't fly.
Yep.
So you should listen to this podcast episode and then go read the book Radical Candor.
Yes, Radical Candor. That's the book. So Think and Grow Rich. Those are 2 resources for this episode.
Not Think and Grow Rich. The How to Influence.
Yes. Yes. Radical candor and how to win friends and influence people.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
And if you can meld those two things together,
Yep.
damn, son.
Yes, absolutely. All right, and that's it, man. Remember, communication is done by the listener. The person that's speaking is only uttering words. You have the responsibility to convey your message effectively for the listener, not for yourself. That's all I got. How about you, Bennett?
Same.
All right, man. Thanks for listening to this episode of Attack Friday, actionable tips, tricks, and coachable knowledge. Come check us out on changeyourpov.com. We got a lot more great content headed your way. Be sure to subscribe on your podcast player of choice, iTunes, Stitcher, Player FM, iHeartRadio, iTunes. We're pretty much everywhere now. Tune in, Google Play. We're there. We're all over it. We're not on Spotify yet. I'm trying to get on Spotify. We're not quite there yet, but we're pretty much everywhere else. So come check us out. And you know what? We would love an honest rating and review. So head on over to iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you listen to your shows, and give us an honest rating and review. We'd love it. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. We also know that the more ratings and reviews we get, the higher in the search engines we become, and more people can find our show. So that's the ultimate goal here, is to get more listeners to the show. So give us a rating and review. Also, share this episode with somebody that you think might benefit from this content. Maybe this particular show hits a chord with you. Chances are it'll probably hit a chord with someone in your life. Share this episode with them. Thank you very much. Until next time.
With